Good afternoon, everyone, and Dave, thanks for the introduction and for allowing us to present today. I'm Joe Racanelli, VP of Investor Relations. I've met a few of you over the years, and it's good to see everyone back, and all of the pandemic-related virtual meetings are hopefully behind us, and we can actually continue on meeting in person. You know, in the time that I do have, and I got to be mindful of the clock, I want to provide an update on Electra for those who've been following us for a while, and as well provide this as an opportunity to introduce the company to some new faces. You're going to hear a lot about critical metals and critical minerals and the need to extract them from the ground and get in production. You know, we're unique in many ways at Electra in the sense that we're not focused on extracting ore from the ground or cobalt from the ground, but rather processing it. We are, in fact, constructing the first cobalt sulfate refinery in North America, and I'll talk a little bit why that matters and why that sets us apart. You know, related to that cornerstone of our strategy, we are also focused on recycling expired batteries, or as known in the industry as black mass. Third component of our strategy, which is a little longer, is to expand into Bécancour, and I'll talk about the corners, each pillars of our strategy in the time that I do have with you. And of course, I'll have that as an opportunity to answer any questions. Dave, the clock hasn't started, just as an FYI. Great. You know, everyone's been looking at the EV space for some time now, in large part because of the bullish forecasts for demand. And these forecasts are being driven not just by consumer demand for electric vehicles, but it's also being driven by new policies that governments around the world are introducing to transition to cleaner vehicles and reduce carbon emissions. And subsequent to that, we're seeing a lot of investments being made by the various OEMs around the world, from the Fords, GMs, and Teslas, into new construction facilities to transition, in the case of the old traditional OEMs, from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles themselves. Now, the growth of the OEMs is driving, of course, the need for critical minerals and metals. And as pointed out, from our perspective, it's not just about taking it from the ground, it's ensuring that those materials can actually be processed in the form to allow the manufacture of electric vehicle battery cells. At Electra, we see this as a tremendous opportunity, in large part because how the industry is currently constructed. The bulk of materials currently are processed out of China. In some cases, close to 90% of battery-related materials are being processed out of China, and it certainly puts North America at a considerable disadvantage if we look, in particular, over the last couple of years, at some of the geopolitical risks that we've seen, and what that means is being too reliant on China. So that provides an excellent opportunity for us to be part of what is now emerging as the onshoring of the EV supply chain. And as mentioned, we are building the only cobalt sulfate refinery in North America. And for those familiar enough with the EV batteries, you know, there's a number of chemistries that have emerged. The most dominant one is NMC, which is the nickel, manganese, and cobalt. And it's important for those elements to be processed in battery-grade materials, typically in the sulfate format, before they can actually be turned into cathode active materials that make up the battery cells. You know, our progress since I joined the company, I mean, I joined June of 2022, has been considerable for a company of our size. You know, the key areas of focus that I want to touch on and expand on in the time that I do have left relate to the construction of the refinery itself. We launched a black mass trial late last year and have received considerable successes to date. Just as significant, we have signed a couple of agreements and MOUs. Most notably, we signed we extended, we first signed a contract with LG Energy Solution last September, and then in June or July of this summer, we extended that from 3 to 5 years. And that's as battery makers around the world are trying to lock in supply based on the pent-up demand that's anticipated to be forthcoming. Related to that, we did sign an MOU to form a joint venture with a First Nations economic group called Three Fires, and I'll touch on that in a minute or two. By way of background, or by way of update with our refinery project, this is what the asset looked like in June of 2021, just before we started to bring it back on stream. This asset had been acquired by Electra, at the time was known as First Cobalt. It had been an idle asset. It's located just outside of Cobalt, Ontario, and now known as Temiskaming Shores. And this is what the refinery looks like 2 years later. We've sunk in a considerable amount of money, close to $80 million, to get this to the stage where it's at. And as you can see, there are a couple of key buildings that I want to touch on. The white one at the top right corner is what's the solvent extraction plant. This is where the hydroxide material that we receive will be processed through a leaching process to extract the key cobalt solvent. And then that goes into the center building where you see there that's under a scaffolding, which is the crystallizer circuit, whereby we will turn the cobalt that we would refine into a salt that then gets shipped out to customers for them to be turning it into cathode active materials. A more recent shot, and this is some equipment that we received late September, beginning of October. And this is one of the challenges that we faced during the last 2 years. Supply chain issues and disruptions have been problematic for us. Some of this equipment had been ordered in late 2021, and in some cases it took us almost 2 years to get it. And this is one of the reasons why we've encountered some delays with the construction of our project. You know, the other factor that has come into play relates to the impact of inflation. And so right now we're trying to address the budget shortfall that we do have with our refinery project. We need about $60 million US to complete the construction of the refinery. And we have a number of considerations right now to secure that, one of which relates to some government funding. Late in 2020, the Canadian and federal government each committed $5 million, and then in February, or earlier this year, they committed another $5 each. So there's $20 million that's been committed both federally and provincially combined. To date, we've only received $5. So we're aggressively trying to ensure that that $15 million of funding that has been earmarked for us is actually delivered to us. Other slices of funding that we're looking for, and we're trying to be non-dilutive, is applying for DoD grants that are being made possible under the auspices of the U.S. Defense Patriot Act. As for those following the sector, the U.S. and is looking at North America as an entity, a single entity, including Canada within there, to fund the development of critical minerals-related project, particularly because the Inflation Reduction Act is championing the need for onshoring here in North America. Next steps within our refinery, in addition to the funding activities to secure the funding, we are going to be continuing on receiving some long lead items. We do want to continue on limit the capital expenditures until we get that visibility with our funding. Earlier this summer, we did complete a funding raise of about $21.5 million. So we do have some liquidity and we do have some flexibility, but nonetheless, maintaining degrees of austerity until that additional funding comes through is going to be key for us. As mentioned, another area of focus of Electra relates to the recycling of battery materials. Batteries, and if anybody who's had cell phones for about 10 years or so know that they degrade. Batteries degrade, and they need to get replaced. And the same applies for the EV batteries. There is an opportunity to reuse the elements that are contained in those lithium-ion batteries. The challenge is, of course, is to separate all the material into discrete elements so that they can be repurposed to create battery-grade elements so that they can actually be produced in the construction of battery cells. What you're seeing here is an example of a bag that's called black mass. And it's black primarily because of the graphite content. But within that bag is not only nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite, and lithium. Our challenge is how do we separate it? And so we've developed a process, a hydrometallurgical process, that allows to separate each of those elements and produce then resaleable products that then can in turn be used to create other components. Right now, we've created at our refinery, through the black mass trial that we've launched and had some successes, we've recovered and produced a number of products, one of which is a nickel cobalt mixed hydroxide precipitate. The white element here is called lithium carbonate, and we're sending this to customers.
Now, the material that we were producing currently is not yet battery grade. We still need a bit of investment to make that happen, but it's at a significant grade or quality that it can be reused. In the case of the nickel cobalt MHP, it is being used in the construction or the production of alloys. We do have a couple of other steps that we want to continue on with our trial. We're getting close to completing that, and we're anticipating that being done before end of year. We will be providing an update on our successes and achievements. Earlier this summer, we did update and issue out a scoping study that showed that it had some compelling economics. So we've been doing the recycling in a batch process. We do have consideration for us to transition from batch to continuous operations at the refinery footprint itself. And that's one key thing to underscore. We're actually doing this work at the refinery itself. We've advanced enough construction at the refinery to be able to produce products from our recycling efforts. If we do transition to continuous operations, we will be producing about 2,500 tons per year. And based on the economics of the scoping study, that would generate between $9 and $12 million of EBITDA per year, based on different and prevailing commodity prices. Quickly on Bécancour, for those familiar with the space, the Quebec government, and as well as in support of the Canadian federal government, is going ahead with the construction of a battery park in Quebec, outside of Montreal, not far from Trois-Rivières, and has already attracted about $450 million worth of investment. GM, Ford, POSCO have made significant investments. Within the last couple of weeks, Northvolt has made commitments to building battery plants not far from there. We were asked in June of last year to replicate our refinery in Bécancour. And so for a company of our size that provides testament of our metallurgical capabilities, our understanding of the industry and our relationships with various players. So right now we're going to be going ahead with the development of a pre-feasibility study to give indication of what the actual CapEx costs for developing a comparable refinery in Bécancour. We are anticipating and have received indication that any CapEx needed will be co-funded by the Quebec to the tune of 50%, so we're excited about that. One of the things that makes Electra unique is the fact that we have a low carbon footprint, and it's important for us to draw attention to that. A comparable refinery in China would produce 50% more carbon emissions than we would, and that's an advantage for us, particularly as OEMs are looking to reduce their carbon footprint, and that'll give us an advantage going forward. And we obviously want to maintain that advantage. We do have a commitment to being net zero emitter by 2050, so we still have some time to be able to do that. But nonetheless, as we stand today, our refinery produces 50% less carbon emissions than comparable refineries out of China. And within the grand scheme of things in the industry, it's huge and significant. For longtime followers of our company, know that we started out being an explorer of cobalt assets. We still have a couple of properties in the Idaho Cobalt Belt. That's North America's only primary cobalt area. We've done some exploration work. Earlier this year, we updated our mineral resource estimate. And our focus now is we're waiting for some additional permitting to be granted to us to continue on exploration work in Idaho. We think that this longer-term play will provide a source of important feed for us, whether through Bécancour or our refinery itself in Ontario. I mentioned LG, and it's important to put this in perspective. So LG has basically taken 80% of our throughput that we will be producing once our refinery is commissioned. That's important for a variety of different reasons. LG, as you know, has going ahead with the construction of a battery facility with Stellantis in the Windsor corridor. We have a strong relationship. We're hopeful that that can be parlayed into a longer relationship, more from a strategic perspective. Another strategic relationship that's important to us that we announced earlier this summer relates to a First Nations economic group called Three Fires. Three Fires is located on the traditional lands where both the Stellantis plant as well as the Volkswagen plant are being constructed. Three Fires wants to be part of the EV ecosystem because they are concerned about battery waste. And so their interest is to reduce the amount of battery waste and recycle it. And so their plan, and jointly with us, would be for them to get access to the battery waste from those two battery plant facilities, and then work with us to recycle and repurpose it so that the battery makers themselves can repurpose and reuse their material. Near-term milestones that we do have, as mentioned, we do anticipate some additional delivery of some of the key pieces of equipment at the refinery itself. We will be finalizing our black mass trial before end of year and be issuing out a summary report and provide some additional details on the economics associated with the transition to continuous operations. From a longer, and as well, more importantly, we anticipate some funding decisions in the near term that I referenced earlier, that $15 million in particular, as well as some funding applications that we are going ahead with. Just this past couple of weeks, we did bring on board a lobbyist to help us out in that regard, and we will be working with them to try and advance our relationships with government stakeholders to secure our fair share of government funding on that front. Dave, the clock seems to be going in the right direction. Yep. Okay, we got another 2 minutes. From a capital structure perspective, I mentioned that we did raise about $21.5 million. We have about $15 million of cash in the bank. Next week, we will be reporting our Q3 results and updating our financials, and provide updated with respect to our capital structure and financial details. We do have about $52 million of convertible debt on our books. Our lenders have been very supportive with us, and they are long-term believers in the EV theme, and as well as the place that we will play within that space. So within that context, why Electra? A couple of key points to take away. Only cobalt sulfate refinery in North America is we're constructing. We have made a number of important milestones with respect to recycling of black mass. As mentioned, the first plant scale trial in North America, the first time lithium carbonate has been able to be recycled and produced using a hydrometallurgical process. We do have cobalt assets in Idaho that we're looking to explore and eventually bring into production, and we do have longer-term prospects with respect to Bécancour. So thank you for your time. We do have a couple minutes for some Q&A.